Well, good morning. Today's reflection is at the Trappist monastery at Orval, and it's a reflection on John 11, 1-60. My theme is rebuilding, reforming and refining in God's good time and for God. In John's Lazarus story, Jesus actively decides to wait until after Lazarus is dead before going to visit. And he says this is because his response will be even more to the glory of God. And it leaves me to think about what we have to let die in order for the glory of God to be seen in what we do later. Benedictine monks arrived here in Orval in 1132 and set up the abbey, which was then repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt all the way through to 1793, when it was destroyed during the French Revolution. It wasn't for over 100 years until the monks returned, and in the 1930s built this absolutely amazing neo-Romanesque Art Deco building, this church, this huge praise to God in many ways. And you can see that that whole cycle of death and rebirth seems to be going on here in the buildings. But is it just about the buildings? You see, Benedict had two rules to his life. The first was prayer, and the second was work. And that's the bit I really want to focus on, because his monks withdrew from the world. They actually embraced lockdown and then worked and prayed and worked. And in their rebuilding, they rebuilt lives. They brewed beer. Interestingly, just like champagne, it was a special beer that had a secondary fermentation. And that beer was thought of as liquid bread. It was actually handed out to the poor, and today, when they brew beer, a whole chunk of the profits go towards charities and looking after the poor. They also made cheese, some rather marvellous cheese, as it turns out, based on the idea of Port Salut. I don't know whether you've had it, but I love it. So their work produced things that still today have positives in the world. And all this from effectively withdrawing from the world into lockdown. And we know now that that's not a simple thing anymore. It sounds like a retreat from the world and a giving up of stuff. But it's also quite tough. Sitting up at 4 in the morning and worshipping and working, praying all the way through to the end. Now, my question at the end of all this is, we've been in an enforced lockdown, and what have we found out that we've had to allow to die, and what have we built on? For me, one of the things that was allowed to die, much to my regret, was the ability to worship together in a group. I'd just signed up to work on the circuit and come and visit you all, and by now I'd have been to each of your places of worship at least 2 times, and we'd know each other really well. What have I had to build in replacement of it? Well, it took me a few weeks to summon up the courage, because I don't know any of you, apart from those at Lanchester particularly. And it was a real trauma for me to decide that this might be a way of rebuilding something out of having given up this public worship. And it's really still very strange to share with people I haven't met my kitchen, the garden, going for a jog, and even now my holidays. And yet I don't know you all personally. And so as we come out of lockdown, I'm really looking forward to building a personal relationship with people. Certainly, I don't know that's happening now. All I can do is hope that the Spirit is moving. About 10 people give me a thumbs up every now and again, and they're usually the same people, so I have no idea whether this is really a worthwhile glorying of God, a reflection on the Gospels. And I sort of really feel that I want to sort of put this aside. And it's an interesting thought with the monks here. We're now looking at Trappist monks, but Trappist monks were formerly Cistercian monks. They were a reformed bunch of monks. And the reason they reformed was because they felt the Cistercians were getting a bit soft, weren't just doing prayer and work, were getting a bit too rich and a bit too fat. And funnily enough, Cistercian monks were reformed Benedictine monks because they felt that the Benedictines had also got a little too fat, a little too wealthy, and weren't focused again on those core things. So things don't have to die permanently. Things can reform for the greater good. And perhaps today it's not about what we kick out or has died. It's perhaps what we come back to with more verve, more commitment, and perhaps worship together is something that we can look forward to in a reformed way, in a better way, something where the Spirit really does touch us because we've missed it for so long. So I look forward to, at some point in the future, in God's good time, for us to do that. And my challenge today for you is to think about what you've had to let go during lockdown, that you want to rebuild in a better way, in a bigger way, to the glory of God. Amen.